first one opened its eyes, while Sergeant Dovath was still talking. I know the exact moment because I was recording. My field log shows a timestamp, a clean, sterile number, and on the audio track beneath it you can hear Dovath mid-sentence. Something about the vault's atmospheric seal. And then nothing but the sound of 8 tons of stone-plated predator, inhaling for the first time in 818 years. Dovath did not finish his sentence. None of my security escort finished much of anything after that. The vault is 4 chambers deep, 3 kilometers under the Tharavan moon's crust, and the Vareth had been sleeping in the innermost chamber in a ring, heads toward the center, spokes on a wheel. When the atmosphere seal broke and the recycled air from our bore corridor hit them, they did not wake slowly. There was no groggy blinking, no gradual stiffening of limbs. One breath and they were up, all 8, moving. I will not record what happened to the escort in clinical detail because the clinic tales are not the point of this account. I will say only that the Vareth are the size of heavy cargo haulers, that they move on 6 limbs. Each limb ends in a hooked plate of dense keratin the length of my forearm, and that stone plate armor that has been calcifying for 8 centuries is, if anything, harder than when it was new. I ran. Every member of my survey team ran. The bore corridor back to the lift was 40 meters, and I covered it in a time I have no intention of sharing with my department's physical fitness assessors. I reached the mouth of the corridor and turned back because I am a scientist, and some part of me that has since reconsidered its life choices still wanted data. That is when I saw Ren Okafor walking the other direction, toward the vault. The sounds. He was 53 years old, civilian deep site salvage contractor, hired because the Tharavan moon is technically a contested extraction zone, and the Territorial Authority cannot deploy its own worker without triggering a diplomatic incident. He smelled of machine oil and fine rock dust, and he had a thermos of something hot clipped to his belt that he had not yet gotten around to drinking. He was walking at the pace of a man who has seen a long career's worth of things that were supposed to be emergencies and turned out not to be. Hands loose at his sides, head slightly tilted. I said his name. He glanced back at me. Noise stopped, he said. I told him the noise had stopped because the beasts were killing my security escort. He considered this. Doesn't sound like killing, he said. He had good ears. I realized now that he was right. He turned back toward the vault and kept walking. I followed him because I am, apparently, constitutionally incapable of not documenting things. I kept the recorder running. I want that noted clearly in whatever review board examines this account. The innermost chamber is 18 meters high and roughly circular, with walls that the Vareth had scored and smoothed over centuries of habitation before the long sleep. There are murals, in a sense. Not painted but carved, pressed, the repeated gesture of 8 bodies moving through the same space for so long that their passage became a record. When we had entered the first time, 2 hours earlier, with lights and instruments and the full survey complement, it had been a dead space, archaeological, a relic. It was not dead now. The Vareth had not pursued us into the bore corridor. I did not know why at the time. I understand it now. They were oriented. 800 years is a long time to sleep, but the Vareth are patient animals, and when they woke they needed a moment to determine what kind of situation they had woken into. They were still in that moment when Ren walked through the corridor mouth and into the chamber. He stopped. He looked at them. They looked at him. The nearest one was 3 meters at the shoulder. Its stone plate head the rough shape of an anvil, its 6 eyes arranged in 2 vertical rows that caught the light of Ren's helmet lamp and threw it back amber. It had blood on its foreplate. It was not Ren's blood. The beast's nostrils, wide, flat, each the size of my spread hand, flared twice. One stepped toward him on a limb that left a crack in the chamber floor simply from the weight. Ren sat down, cross-legged, on the floor of the chamber. He unclipped his thermos, looked at it, decided against it, and set it beside him on the stone. "Easy now," he said. His voice in the chamber was not loud. It was the voice of a man talking to something he is not afraid of, which is different from the voice of a man performing bravery. The distinction is audible. I have listened to that recording many times. The nearest Vareth stopped moving. I held my breath. I believe I stopped blinking. I was pressed against the far wall of the corridor mouth, cording, and I was no longer thinking about data. The beast lowered its head, not the sudden drop of an animal preparing to charge. A long, deliberate descent, the stone-plated skull traveling down through the arc until the underside of its jaw rested on the floor of the chamber 3. Meters from Ren's knees, its 6 eyes stayed open. It was watching him. The second Varath moved, not toward the corridor toward Ren. It came around the perimeter of the ring, placing each limb with a precision that seemed at odds with its scale, and settled itself to Ren's left, lying down with a slow hydraulic heaviness that sent a tremor through the floor I felt in my boots 50 meters away. Then the third, the fourth. Ren did not move. He had his hands on his knees, palms up, and he was doing the thing I later learned he did in confined spaces on long shifts. A slow breathing rhythm, in for 4 counts, out for 6, and the nearest Varath, the one with its head on the floor, was matching him. I do not know if it knew it was doing this. I do not know if it matters. By the time the 8th Varath had settled around him, Ren Okafor was the center of a ring of ancient war beasts, and the largest of them, the one I would later designate the Alpha based solely on the deference the others showed it, had its stone-plate head resting in his lap with an absolute lack of ceremony, as though this were simply where it had always intended to put it. Ren had one hand on the side of its skull, moving in slow passes over the plate seams where the ancient hide had grown in ridges. I could hear, on the recording, a sound I initially mistook for a geological event. Subsidence, maybe. Some deep settling of the moon's crust. Me 4 replays to recognize it as purring. I filed a preliminary report. I filed a secondary report. I filed an urgent addendum to the secondary report. The Territorial Authority's regional command received all 3 within the hour and dispatched a security response team inside of 2 because the Varath are listed under Salvage and Containment Protocol 7. Apex class, extinction level threat potential, and the authority's position, legally and philosophically, that extinction level threat potential assets do not belong in the lap of a civilian contractor from a mining cooperative. The kill squad arrived by fast drop 8 hours after the vault breach. 12 soldiers under Commander Hessek ran, full suppression loadout, 2 heavy units mounted with the kind of disruptor arrays that are calibrated for armored fauna. Ran had a reputation. He had handled 3 separate Protocol 7 activations in his career, and he had a way of talking about this. In briefings, in reports, in the mess hall before deployment. That made it clear he considered himself the authority on what Apex-class fauna responses looked like, what they required, and how they ended. He descended the bore corridor at the front of his unit and stopped at the corridor mouth. And was still in the chamber. He had been there for 8 hours. Someone from my team had sent down food at the 4-hour mark, lowered in a crate on a line, and Ren had eaten it, and apparently shared some of it. No idea what 8th millennium war beasts make of packaged protein rations. And I am adding this to the list of questions for a future research proposal. He was, at the moment Ran arrived, sitting with his back against the Alpha's flank, reading something on a battered handheld. The Alpha's breathing moved his shoulders gently. A slow rhythm. The other 7 Varath were arranged around them, with the loose watchfulness of animals that are resting but not asleep. 2 of them had their heads toward the corridor mouth. They had heard the soldiers coming down long before the soldiers arrived. Ran assessed the situation for approximately 4 seconds. Then he raised his voice and addressed Ren in the tone of a man who is accustomed to being obeyed. Contractor, exit the containment zone, immediately. Ren looked up from his handheld. He looked at Ran. He looked at the 2 Varath with their heads oriented toward the corridor. He looked back at Ran. I wouldn't, Ren said. That is a direct order from Territorial Authority. I heard you, Ren said. I'm saying I wouldn't push it right now. They're calm. They don't need to stay that way. Ran had not survived 3 Protocol 7 responses by listening to civilian contractors. Eat his unit forward into the corridor, and the 2 lead soldiers stepped into the chamber mouth with their disruptors at ready. The Alpha raised its head from the floor. Its 6 eyes, which had been half-lidded, opened. All of them. There is a quality to the Varath's full attention gaze that I am not certain I can render accurately in language. I have seen recording equipment struggle to capture it. The light seems to behave differently, as though the eyes are not simply reflecting illumination, but doing something more deliberate with it. 800 years of dormancy had not softened the quality of that gaze by any detectable measure. Ren closed his handheld. He stood up, which involved the alpha shifting its weight to accommodate him with a patience that seemed, in context, almost absurd. Brushed rock dust off his knees. He did not look at Ran. "Hey," he said, to the alpha, quietly. "Give them a second." He turned to Ran. His voice stayed the same. "Call your people back to the corridor. Contractor, you do not have authority." "Commander," I said from behind Ran. I had been recording from the corridor for the mouth for the past 8 hours. My voice came out steadier than I expected. "I'm recommending you listen to him." Ran did not have time to decide whether to listen. One of his lead soldiers raised the disruptor. Not a full targeting motion, a reflexive half-raise. The kind of muscle response that happens when something very large moves very fast in your peripheral vision, because the Varath on the left flank had stood up. All 8 of them stood up. The sound of it was tectonic. The chamber, 18 meters high, was suddenly much smaller. The Alpha turned toward the soldiers and its stone plate neck ridge rose. I did not know until that moment that the neck ridge was a separate structure that could raise independently, like the hackles of a canid writ in calcified stone, and when it rose fully, it added another meter to the animal's silhouette. Ran went pale. I could see it even in the corridor lighting. Ren stepped forward, between the Alpha and the soldiers. He was not a large man. He wore standard excavation fatigues, with the Cooperative's logo on the chest, and he had rock dust in his hair. And the thermos still clipped to his belt. He looked at Ran. "Pull them back," he said. "I'm telling you once." I've thought many times about what happened in Commander Ran's face in the next 2 seconds. He was a decorated officer, with a record of decisive action under extreme conditions. He was a man who had genuinely never encountered a situation he could not resolve with authority and firepower. And he was standing in a Boer corridor, looking at a 53-year-old civilian salvage worker who had 8 ancient extinction-class war beasts standing behind him in a ready posture and a tone of voice that suggested the matter was already decided. Ran pulled his people back. He did it without a word. He made a gesture, and the unit retreated up the corridor, and Ran himself went last. And he did not turn his back to the chamber mouth until he was 30 meters away. I noted this. The Varath did not follow. They settled again, one by one, when the sound of the boots had faded, that same deliberate, hydraulic lowering of mass, floor transmitting each impact as a distinct tremor. The Alpha pressed its head briefly against Ren's shoulder before it lay back down. He put a hand on the side of its skull and held it there. The formal reports describe what followed as a negotiated access resolution. Commander Ran's after-action filing cites suboptimal tactical positioning upon initial ingress and reassessment of containment classification. These are the terms that careers are preserved with. I noted in my own supplementary report that the commander was observed leaving the Theraven excavation site approximately 4 hours after the corridor incident, and that his expression during the extraction lift departure was not one I could categorize under any standard emotional coding in the Territorial Authority's documentation framework. His unit had not fired a single shot. This was the correct outcome. 3 days after the vault breach, the Authority's classification board formally upgraded the Varath to protected ancient entity status under the contested Frontier Accords. This reclassification made any further Protocol 7 action legally inadvisable. I understand there were discussions at senior levels. I was not part of them. I was in the vault. Ren Okafor renegotiated his salvage contract on the 2nd day. His new terms included a habitat assessment provision, a dietary requirements study clause, and what he called a reasonable familiarization period, which was the phrase he used to describe the arrangement by which he continued to sleep in. The vault, in a reclaimed bedroll on the floor with the Alpha's stone-plated flank 6 inches from his back. I have the updated contract on file. Cooperative's legal team apparently required 4 hours and two consultations before they determined there was no existing clause that prohibited it. On the 4th day, Ren walked out of the vault, through the Boer corridor, and up the lift to the surface station to collect a supply delivery. I had my recorder running. He walked through the station corridor at his usual pace, unhurried, hands loose at his sides. The Barath came up the lift behind him, all 8. They had to come one at a time because the lift cage fits 1 at full capacity, and it made 7 additional trips. The station staff were informed in advance. Most of them had chosen to be elsewhere. Ren collected his supplies. He signed the intake manifest. He clipped the new thermos to his belt. The Varath were arranged behind him in the corridor by the time he turned. Around the Alpha at the front, the other 7 fanned in a rough wedge formation. Stone plate heads level, 6 eyes apiece forward, 18 meters of station corridor and every centimeter of it accounted for. He looked at them. They looked at him. "All right," he said. "Let's go back down." He walked back toward the lift they followed. The floor recorded each step. I have the seismic log. Psst. I have been a military archaeologist for 31 years. I have spent those years in contested zones and excavation sites and vault chambers, documenting the artifacts of civilizations that ended before my species developed agriculture. I have held the bones of things that made the current apex powers look temporary, and I have written careful, measured reports about all of it. Do not have careful, measured words for what I watched in that corridor. I have the recording. I have the seismic log. I have the image on my field system of Ren Okafor, 53 years old, in dusty excavation fatigues, walking toward a lift cage at the end of a station corridor, and 8 ancient war beasts, things that had been worshipped, then feared, forgotten, then feared again the moment they woke, moving behind him in formation. Patient, settled his. The last entry in my preliminary report reads, "Recommend immediate reclassification of Varath behavioral profile. Current designation, Apex class, extinction level threat potential. Recommended revised designation, query pending." I have not yet determined the correct word for what they are now. I know what they recognized. I watched it happen. I am still watching.